I would commonly hear people say the phrase, well, my mom was a Republican, my dad was a Democrat. Oh, my dad was a Democrat, my mom was a Republican. But they'd like say all the time. People would talk about how their families, and then they wouldn't even say was, they would say voted. Mm-hmm. They go like, my dad voted Republican in the last election, and people would say that on the news. I'd watch interviews. They'd be like, well, I voted Democrat last time, but I'm not happy with things, so I'm going to vote Republican this time because I'm not. But it was an action as opposed to an identity.
Yeah.
Right. And I was going to say, I think that is so spot on that it has become so tribal. And we're talking about why people sort of stick with Trump no matter what. I think changing or pivoting or reconsidering is an assault to their whole identity.
I think to all of us, to be honest.
I think so too.
I'll say for myself, if there is something that I have tied my identity to, and that thing falls in some way, my first instinct is to defend it, as opposed to now questioning my worldview and beliefs. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, totally. I think it's deeply psychological. I think it's primal.
Yeah.
And very visceral. I find myself that way too, because although I try to check myself, my feed is full of people who agree with me, basically. I try to look at other points of view as well. But talk about confirmation bias. On the other hand, this isn't like Mitt Romney and Barack Obama.
No, it's not.
It is not normal. And so whenever I feel like, gosh, am I rooting against Trump? Does that mean I'm rooting against America? Mm-hmm. And I question myself, and I question my emotional response to some of the things that happen.
Yeah.
But I also think this person is dangerous, corrupt, and, it's very difficult for me. And then I'm like, I need to note when he does something positive, right? Like even mentally, I need to be more receptive. Oh, this was a good thing, right?
Right.
And I think it's hard for many of us who have been inundated with the bad things that he's been doing, the bad choices, the lack of respect for the rule of law and the Constitution, the self-enrichment of him and his family. I mean, the list goes on and on. The cheering when Robert Mueller dies, just so many distasteful things that it's hard to kind of even have that little crack to say, oh, that was probably a good idea, a good policy, and maybe that's helpful. Whether it's like, sort of in the first term, the criminal justice reform stuff he did,
yeah, right.
Which arguably was a good thing, getting rid of what minimum, maximum or whatever, and people who were being incarcerated. And Kim Kardashian got involved, and, you think, well, that's a positive thing.
Yes.
But the negative stuff, so it's like a tsunami of negative stuff. It's hard to kind of, come up and gasp for air and say, oh, that's good. And then you're like sucked under again by the bad stuff.
I'm surprised that you even experienced that, because I've always assumed incorrectly that journalists pull, their inspiration and ideas from a different spiritual realm. Does that make sense? Like, I always assume that we, the people who are reading the news, are just reading the news, and then journalists are sort of on this ephemeral plane where news is merely like a different idea to you. But it's interesting that you are in it. So I'd love to know, how do you then, or do you even think of putting on different hats as like a person, a citizen, and then a journalist? How do you? Is it even possible to do that, or do you always have to remind yourself that you have all hats on at the same time?
I mean, I think that I have become a citizen journalist.
Oh, interesting.
I'm a citizen first now, and a journalist second, because I feel like it is such a perilous time and such a dangerous time that I am paying attention in a different way. And I think, as I said, it's not just policy differences that we're evaluating here. It's not just saying, if you feel morally repulsed by the way ICE was behaving in Minneapolis, as a citizen, that deeply offended me. And I am not going to both sides, like, this is what they're doing. This is how the people of Minneapolis are reacting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think looking back on it, even ICE defenders would admit, I would hope many, that it was out of control.
Yeah.
Things were completely out of control in Minneapolis earlier this year. And so I am also someone who I feel has earned the privilege of, at times, experiencing moral outrage at what I'm seeing. And I am not encumbered by, a corporate overlord saying, you can't say that, you can't do that.
Was that common in your previous job? Like, give me an understanding of what it's like. People often use, phrases like the mainstream media and they don't want you to. What is your honest assessment or even experience of working in an environment where you are under a corporation and how much do they decide what you are or aren't going to do?
Well, first of all, I think there was a lot of separation between sort of the companies and the news divisions. You saw General Electric owned NBC, GE when I was there.
Yeah.
And, there were times where if there was a story about GE, we would either not report it or say it's the parent company of NBC.
Okay.
But for the most part, these corporations kept out. There was a very clear line between the corporation and the news division, and they didn't mix. And now, obviously, there are quid pro quos happening in corporate media and news division. So it is a completely different ball of wax. It's like apples and oranges. I can't say, like, this is how we did it back in the day, because everything has changed. Trump is basically controlling these huge multi-million-dollar consolidation, conglomerates, whatever you want to call it, mergers, and they can't merge without the FCC and his administration giving them approval.
Yeah.
So they're basically bowing down and saying, we're going to give you $16 million because the Kamala Harris interview was edited in a way that you didn't like, which was complete unadulterated bullshit. That case had no merit. But they gave him $16 million. Similarly, ABC with George Stephanopoulos, $15 million because he said sexual assault, I think, I think he said rape instead of sexual assault or whatever.
Right.
And normally, I think back in the day, Katie Couric, back in the day, we would probably issue an on-air apology correction.
Yeah. Correction, yeah.
But I don't think anytime I worked at a network would they pay somebody because they were afraid of the ramifications if they didn't.
You would feel like it would be like a badge of honor, in fact. A
badge of honor to what?
To be sued by a person in the administration, in any administration. I always felt like journalists who came up against the government, I always felt that was a badge of honor. We saw it in South Africa. The journalists who were arrested by the apartheid government, it was a badge of honor. The journalists who were in war zones, who were arrested by, rebel factions or the governments that people were trying to overthrow, it was a badge of honor. It always used to be this badge of honor where it's like, we are now going to stand our ground and show you.
They're speaking truth to power.
Exactly.
On the other hand, I think, if journalists make mistakes, right?
And
correct
that's different.
Incorrectly,
Yes.
Or report it, then I think that's how the system works, right? And so I don't think you can say sort of carte blanche that or generalize that it's a badge of honor all the time. But it's totally different now, the way they're using their power to suppress stories, to change how the framework of stories or, how a story is positioned. I was talking to a friend the other day about when CBS News did a 16-second reader on January 6th, and they were basically saying Hakeem Jeffries said this, Donald Trump said that.
Yeah.
Now, if there's no universal understanding that January 6th was an insurrection, that people were killed, police officers, and yes, one protester, but that it was an attempt to overturn an election and disrupt the peaceful transfer of power.
And hang Mike Pence.
And
Just never
hang
forget
Mike
that.
Pence.
Because they had a sign. They were like, we're coming to hang Mike Pence.
And throw the election in Donald Trump's favor, then they're not being truthful.
Yeah.